Hi everyone, my name is Allegra Integra, and today I'm going to do a book haul. Despite being an avid library user, you can see my little library user pin here, hopefully, I have fallen off the book buying wagon. I can really place the blame on one thing, which is there was a indie bookstore that recently opened in my area, and it is a wonderful community space, and I found myself kind of pulling out my debit card and purchasing books. So that's where I am. I have actually tried to film and edit this video like 3 or 4 times, so hopefully I can get through this pretty quick, and I will start with the books that I've already talked about in previous videos. The first book that I'm going to talk about today is Postcolonial Love Poem, and that's by Natalie Diaz. This is probably apparent by the title, this is a collection of poetry by Natalie Diaz, who is an Indigenous woman. I have a more thorough review of this in my April wrap-up. I'm not the best at explaining why I like poems, but this is an amazing collection. If you're not sure if you want to pick this up, I highly recommend looking up the poem Catching Copper, because if you read that and like that, you're going to like the rest of this collection. The next book is also a collection of poems, and that is Dearly by Margaret Atwood. I am a huge Margaret Atwood fan, specifically of her speculative fiction. I believe I read this in March, and I had initially gotten it from the library and realized once I completed it, I wanted to own it so I could annotate it and just have it to reread and reread over and over again. The next book is Plain Bed Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. This is a slightly illustrated, really big, like gothic horror book that I'm not sure if I should have bought it or not. The cover and the art in it is 100% my thing, and I like the slow burn of this, but I kind of waffle between a 3 and 4 star rating. However, I ultimately am glad I bought it because I plan on rereading it. I believe I reviewed this in either February or March. Okay, so now to books that I've recently hauled that I haven't read yet. For a number of reasons, mostly I still have a long list of books at the library, and while these don't have due dates, that means I really wanted to own them, but I haven't gotten around to them yet. The next book in this haul is Disability Visibility, and this is a collection of essays edited by Alice Wong, written by disabled people. They're all contemporary essays, and they range from people talking about having an invisible illness and what that is like for them, all the way into what we call like deeper theory. This came out in time for the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and as someone who does a lot of work with disabled individuals, as well as has her own personal reasons for finding disability activism very empowering and important, I felt like this was something I really needed to have on my shelves. I'm hoping to get to this by the end of the summer at the latest, because I can not only use it in my personal life, but also professionally. Next up, I have Beowulf, which is translated by Maria Devana Headley. I guess this is going to be a confession video. I've never read Beowulf, and as someone who is a big fantasy fan, that seems kind of like a travesty. So I specifically picked this version up because it is the first official translation done by a woman. However, since I've never read it, I feel a bit weird trying to compare this translation to the other ones that were previously considered a gold standard. So if I feel ambitious, I might actually try to pick up one of the other ones that's kind of been used in college courses prior to this one and compare and contrast. I'm usually not that ambitious, but I like to play around with project ideas, so maybe keep your eyes peeled for that. This is essentially an epic poem that is probably considered one of the oldest, I think it's one of the oldest recorded stories, and it's really sad that I haven't read it yet. I'm excited. I want to see how her interpretation holds up, and I think I will. I think I will get another version, probably from the library though. This next book I actually I ordered from bookshop.org, not from going into the actual indie bookstore itself. That's because I didn't know at the time that this store will order books, like independent press books for you. Now that I know that, I plan on doing that more often, but regardless, I was still able to support local stores by using bookshop.org, and that is going to be Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. I always want to say Gibson. And this is kind of like a retelling, reimagining of Dracula, but it's from the perspective of his brides, and they are also, it's like queer, creepy, dark romance. So of course I'm going to be into that. I'm really excited about this. It will probably also prompt me to reread Dracula. I don't think I've read Dracula since high school. One quick thing about this, because it is an indie press book by Nyx Publishing, the printing is a little weird. The chapters don't have any headers or anything. For example, here is like a chapter ends and then here's a short chapter and that's it. There's no separation. And there's also a couple just like blank pages because of that as well. I don't think this will bother me, but if that's something that concerns you, maybe wait for later printing. Next up is another nonfiction book that is going to show some obvious themes in the nonfiction that I like to read, and that is Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space, and that is by Amanda Leduc. I'm just going to read the blurb on the back of this because it describes it way better than I ever could, and that is, fairy tales shape how we see the world, so what happens when you identify more with the beast than with beauty? If every disabled character is mocked and mistreated, how does the beast ever imagine happily ever after? Amanda Leduc looks at fairy tales from the Brothers Grimm to Disney, showing us how they influence our expectations and behavior, and linking the quest for disability rights to new kinds of stories that celebrate difference. I often say that there are people out there who are smarter than me that have talked about these topics, and as someone who considers herself a lifelong learner, and again, disability is a topic that's very near and dear to me, I should read theory and books written by people who are smarter than me about it so I can learn more. Next up is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh. I love that Uncarly stated that if this is your favorite book, that's a red flag, but it's also one of her favorite books, and I don't know, I'm here for that. I haven't read anything by Otessa Moshfegh, but this book in particular has grabbed my interest, especially as we all survive this panini. It just sounded really appealing. The basic premise is that this young woman who seems to have it all, like she has a really hip job, her parents pay for her apartment, she just graduated from Columbia. She decides that she's like overwhelmed and unhappy, so she takes sleeping pills and just sleeps for a year, and all the consequences of that. That sounds awesome. It looks a little bit stream of consciousness, and I think this will be a really fun, weird read, or it could go super in the other direction and kind of have the problem of like Girls, the show, and be super obnoxious. The people who reviewed this, who I trust, tend to not think it goes in the obnoxious direction, so hopefully I will agree with them once I'm done reading it. Next up is Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. The basic gist of this book is that it is in a near future where artificial friends, which is a type of AI, have become ubiquitous in people's homes, and this follows a specific AI named Clara and her experiences with humans once she's picked to be someone's artificial friend. From what I can tell, it really boils down to the question, what does love actually mean, and can humans be trusted? And it's going to explore some themes that I'm really looking forward to in my sci-fi lately. I've actually never read anything else by Ishiguro. I do own Never Let Me Go, and several people have noted that they liked Never Let Me Go better than Clara and the Sun. So again, if I get really ambitious and motivated, I might do a vlog reading them and comparing and contrasting them, coming to my own conclusions on that. This one I plan on getting to by June. This next book is, I don't feel comfortable saying the whole title. You're going to see why here shortly. I'm actually going to cover it up too. So this is the Efsler and Their Friends Between Revolutions. So that's not a word for me to use. I am really excited about this. It's kind of an underground, interesting take on queer families and found families specifically. There's also illustrations in it. Oh, I didn't say who it was by. It's by Larry Mitchell, and it was illustrated by Ned Asta. The illustrations are also not YouTube friendly, so I won't be showing those either. But I am going to read a brief part of the introduction, because this book is kind of hard to explain. Part fable, part manifesto. This book introduces us to clandestine networks of chosen family making lives and plotting revolt in Ramrod, an empire in decline ruled by a cruel patriarch and his minister of hate. This world is inhabited by a mythic cosmology of revolutionary protagonists, the efsler, the queens, the women who love women, the queer men, the fairies, the strong women, and of course their opponents, the men. This could go a lot of different ways. I think it's written very like zine-like. I'm not really sure what to think of it. I wanted to have something a little bit not obscure, but just different than the other type of theory and other types of queer literature that I've read in the past. So I'm not sure what my opinion of this will be, but it's going to be an exciting, interesting read regardless of my opinions on it at the end. Next up is Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. This won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and it's a translated work. It's also won the Man Booker International Prize. It was a finalist for the National Book Award for Translated Literature. It was initially written in Polish. Really, ultimately, it's about a young woman who is kind of a recluse, kind of keeps to herself, and then a neighbor who's named Bigfoot, not the monster Bigfoot, but her neighbor's named Bigfoot, turns up dead, and other bodies start being discovered, and Janina decides to investigate this, but no one believes her. So it kind of falls under the Cassandra trope, which is something I really love. If you're not familiar with that trope, that's women speaking up and not being listened to, and then people facing the consequences of not listening to them because they were telling the truth. I've been trying to read more translated works. When I picked this up initially, I actually didn't notice it was a Nobel Prize winner. Hopefully it won't go over my head. And that title is also just super compelling. In a very different genre and probably different tone, the next book I picked up is The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I like dark books, I like twisty books, but I sometimes need something a little more lighthearted, and I've heard a lot of people describe Becky Chambers is like parallel to the hope punk concept or genre, and is very character focused, and it isn't necessarily going to make me feel sad, which is something that to put it into perspective, my roommate recently said, you always pick the sad books when we were talking about the book of the month selections. So I want to try something a little bit less sad and see if that impacts my mood. This is the first in a series, and it does say that it's a space opera, which I'm all about. And it follows the story of Rosemary Harper, and she's on the Wayfarer. I think the series is called the Wayfarer series. And the characters that are on the ship with her. So Sissix, who is a reptilian pilot, Kizzy and Jenks, who are engineers, and the captain, Ashby. And they are going on a mission, and it's going to get them a lot of money, but then it risks their lives. So there's still going to be some peril. Hopefully this is positive, and I'm not completely misreading people's enjoyment of this. And this will be a good summer read. The next book is Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. I love this cover. It is awesome. Real quick, if you are interested in reading this book, I have heard a lot about it having triggers for eating disorders. I think if you read the synopsis, that makes it really clear. It's about a young woman who has made calorie restriction her religion, and then she meets an Orthodox Jewish woman who is intent on feeding her like frozen yogurt, and it just gets weirder from there. If you know anything about Melissa Broder, you can expect this to be a very bizarre, kind of surreal book. It's on the blurb here, it says that it's sexy, and I'm not really sure how this book would be sexy, but if anyone can do it, it is this author. And despite just saying that I want to read things that are a little more lighthearted, I still like my twisty, weird books. The next book in this haul is In the Quick by Kate Hope Day, in this beautiful millennial pink cover. I don't usually do cover buys, but I'm glad these are beautiful. This is the story of a young woman who has fought really hard to be an astronaut, and she decides to try to solve the mystery of a missing spacecraft that her late uncle was involved in. And she ends up working with her late uncle's protege, and her romance grows from that as well. So it's covering a lot of different bases. I don't see a lot of romance in my sci-fi, and hopefully they don't detract from each other. I thought it was an interesting premise, so I decided to pick it up. Next up, I think, is my only classic. I think this is considered a classic, and that is The Master and the Margarita, which is by Mikhail Bulgakov. I love this cover. Again, I don't pick things up for the cover, but this is the 50th anniversary edition, and it has this beautiful art deco. Again, a weird surrealist novel. I don't know a ton about it. I know that the devil comes to Moscow. Ancient Jerusalem is involved in some points, and one of the characters, or at least one of the perspectives, is a cat. That just sounds like a good time to me. I'm not super familiar with Russian works either, and it was, why not start here? Lastly, so I said earlier that while I love the beautiful covers, I'm not usually a cover by person, and this is the exception, and it's also the last book in this haul, and that is Persephone Station by Stina Leicht. I don't see sci-fi book covers that look like that. This is going to be my action-y summer read because when I picked it up, I thought it was going to be more character driven, but the different reviews that I've read say that it's so action-y that it almost suffers for that. So it's going to be my action movie fluff of the summer. Basic premise: there are two people whose paths cross, and they're going to have to face an army that has to do that is actually employed by a corporation who has interest in this faraway planet called Persephone Station. I've heard it has buy rep. It is super action packed, and it's going to look really good on my shelves. So that's exciting. That's all that I have for today. I do plan on continuing to use my library much more than I plan on buying books, but I wanted to kind of showcase some of my more recent purchases just to stay honest, and hopefully you will see these books reviewed in later videos. Have a great one. Bye.